up on the Prime Minister.
Hi, all right. Am I audible and visible?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so I prefer POIs verbally. Okay, let me set up a timer. Okay. Speech start in 3, 2, 1. It is egregious that people's self-worth and the value they attain to themselves is ultimately crushed by ghosting. It is that the victim is left in the dust while never knowing what really went wrong. It is that the ghoster is shackled by their tendencies, which leads them to have worse quality relationships in the future proposed. 2 arguments moving forward. First, that ghosting leaves people immensely emotionally harmed. And second, that this is often harmful for the people who ghost. But before that, 3 points of crucial setup. 1, what does ghosting look like? I think that it is that someone just stops texting you and communicating with you midway. So this might happen through blocking you, ignoring you, leaving you on delivery, or sealing you. In the vast majority of cases, it happens within relationships and dating apps where you've established some form of connection and bond. Note, it is that you cut communication with absolutely no warning. We think this often happens on texting platforms as well. The second point of setup is we support a world where you explain why you cut them off. So we agree with opposition that people are entitled to leave communication, but the difference is that we allow them to leave after openly communicating with that person and allowing them to attain the ability of proper closure. Third, this debate is about the middle ground cases when it would exist, i.e. dating apps and casual relationships. It is not about abandoning abusers because that would happen on the extreme cases. We think that if we debate on the extremes, this debate would just be massively low quality. First argument then, that ghosting leaves people immensely emotionally harmed. A few reasons for why this is true. 1, the harms of ghosting to its victims is massive. It is that A, ghosting is likely to be used as a first resort in a lot of cases. It is a fact that it's the easiest way out of a conversation with someone you don't want to talk to anymore. It is that you don't have to deal with what the other person will feel or say, that they potentially might be emotionally hurt when you say you aren't just interested in them anymore. It is that you don't have to take accountability because you can always have excuses for your sudden absence rather than having to outright talk to this partner about your feelings. Oftentimes, some people are just petty and get annoyed easily and just start ghosting people. We think that these are all harmful. This layer means that ghosting doesn't just happen to potentially problematic people, but in a majority of cases affect people who did nothing wrong, or other than being uninteresting, not that person's type, or just because that person just got bored. People feel emboldened to do it more and more on their op side. But B, the lack of closure is massively damaging to these people as well. It is that the victims unnecessarily critique themselves, which allow them to spiral into a self-deprecating cycle. For instance, the victim is left wondering why this person stopped talking to them. We think that they get existential dread from this, but comparatively, when they know why the person left and have closure, we think the victim is more cognizant of their actual behavior and are able to correct themselves. But I would say that it's also just much worse because when people are left guessing, it is the tipping point to defaulting to the worst or over-exaggeration of their possible faults, i.e. they would think that they were overly obsessive when they just wanted to spend more time talking to you. We think that comparatively, under our side, they're able to have a more realistic grasp of the criticism because it was told to them rather than being left to their imagination. But moreover, we think that people are just unable to move on given it is unclear whether or not your relationship is over. On the comparative, when you clearly call the relationship off, you prevent the other person from the immense sadness that they would feel. Note, they are more likely to carry that dread in future relationships as well. This looks like trust issues where these people constantly check how long their partner replied to them. Comparatively, it is much easier to process and learn from the past relationship by being able to actually talk with your partner. But before I move on to my second point.
On your side, when people confront and tell their reasons for leaving, they're likely to be gaslighted and emotionally blackmailed for staying. What would you do then?
Look, that happens in the extreme cases. We think that this person would just tell them why they were uncomfortable. We think it would be better for this person to tell them, oh, I was bored. I don't think they're going to be like, you are massively overly manipulative. We think that's just unlikely and really convenient for your side. Second reason, that we're able to correct people that would allow for less extreme problematic behavior in the future. Op might say this allows people to leave situations where they are incredibly uncomfortable. We think the extent of discomfort is unlikely to be as big. Why? Because there are filters to who you match with. For instance, you have the same interests, you believe in the same things. There's also information about the other person, such as their profile. And if they are a harasser, they're likely going to be banned. Note, matching with people is also often consensual. So you decide to match with the people you think you'll be comfortable with. So the gaslighting that opposition POIs is just unlikely to happen. But B, in our world, communication means that we are better able to help people improve others to prevent these instances of discomfort to begin with. It is that people individually are not able to identify their problems all on their own because you aren't able to see yourself from a third-party perspective. So you often don't realize what you're doing causes discomfort for other people. But sometimes these can also often be habits for you. So this could possibly be a norm for you. But also, these are not problems per se, but maybe cultural differences that could cause friction in relationships, i.e. one partner could be the more expressive type, while the other person is more reserved with their feelings. But I think then that they are receptive to this criticism on the comparative because the person giving the criticism is someone you have been intimate with or someone that you have some level of degree of trust. But also the other person will likely phrase the criticism in a way that can help you since they also know you well. Even if they don't, then at least it allows you to opt out of the relationship much earlier rather than them bottling up that discontentment and taking it out on you in the worst ways. This also engages with their POI on gaslighting. Two impacts. First, on our side, we protect people from the worst emotional pains that relationships could cause because when you get that explanation, it relieves the vast majority of emotional baggage. Second, it is that we prevent potentially problematic behavior that can happen in the future. We think that the prevention of future instances of discomfort is more important than any protection that Op might argue that you get from ghosting because there are more people in the future and on our side, so we win. Second argument, that ghosting is often harmful for people who ghost. The framing here is that this argument engages with the other actor in this debate. We'll prove that why these people are significantly harmed under Op side. We'll prove why they're much better under our side. A few reasons. One, these people are less able to manage their relationship. That is because when you continually ghost others, you are not able to learn how to handle your partner's individual flaws and quirk that they inherently have. It is that the slight bit of clinginess can throw you off, given that your natural instinct is to leave people in the dust by ghosting. We think that this is a net harm because you were never truly happy. It is that you are always agitated by the little flaws of your current partner. But in our world, we ensure that open communication to the person you are about to ghost is much better because it allows you to stand up for yourself and access that much needed closure. We think that it is a net good that people are able to do this. But B, these people aren't able to learn how to commit to future relationships or that the quality of their relationship deteriorates. We think that when these people get used to ghosting their partners, it becomes difficult to break the habit, especially if they get feelings of relief when they ghost. We think that the impact of this argument is extremely clear. This argument is round winning because we prove that open communication is something that is beneficial for the ghoster as well. We prove that they are better able to commit to relationships by being more open to communication. We think that prevents less fights in the future and allows for better quality partners. On the opposition side, the ghoster, we think that is likely to have lower quality relationships. They're likely to get into more fights with their partner because they just don't know how to do open communication. At the point in which they don't know how to openly communicate and openly call out the inherent flaws of their partner, we think it's just massively damaging. On the proposition side, you get the benefit that the people who ghost and the people who got ghosted are able to attain that closure, are able to have that ability to better improve themselves in the future and change their behaviors. We think could be quite problematic. You ought to side with side proposition at the point in which you want both actors in this debate to live much better lives and have much better relationships. For all these reasons, propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the fine speech. Now, I'd like to welcome the leader of opposition to open the case for opposition. But before that, opposition, please type in the chat your speaker names for opposition.
Am I clearly audible and visible?
Yep. But before you start, can you please type in the chat your speaker name and speaker possession for your team?
Yes.
Wait, before O1 starts, team proposition would like to change our third speaker. Would that be possible? Because our third speaker was choppy all throughout. We don't think it would be feasible for him to listen to the entire round. But then our the speaker that we would like to replace him with prep the speech just in case. Would that be fine?
Yep. If the problem is connection issues, I think that should be fine.
Okay, I updated the speaker orders just in case.
Right. Alo, you can start whenever you're ready.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Let me paint a picture for you. We exist in a world where women who go to clubs with their friends in real life are actively harassed in the presence of individuals who can hold them accountable. We're talking about actual public spaces where women do not feel safe. But a side proposition wants to take this already unsafe world, put it on a platform that has zero accountability and let them run with it. We don't think that this is something justified, so proud to oppose. Before I move on to my substantive argument, a few points of rebuttal, right? Let's deal with side proposition's entire victim characterization, right? We think that proposition lacks an essential characterization of the entire scenario of ghosting, right? Their entire assumption is that most people are irrational individuals who enter dating sites with the sole purpose of leaving people hanging. We think that that's not necessarily true, right? Because firstly, you're investing a great degree of time and effort into getting to know complete strangers via an online platform. And we think that when that is the scenario, your entire characterization about ghosting being a first resort is something that simply does not apply, right? But also secondly, let's talk about the entire use of the word victim. We think that they're using a very strong word to describe a scenario that is not necessarily that strong, right? Because victim implies actual mental or physical harm. We think that ghosting takes place in scenarios where such a harm is not justified, because you don't ghost your best friend that you've known for 12 years. You ghost a stranger that you've been talking to for 2 weeks and you're tired of. We think that that is the word that we're operating in, and that is the grounds that they have to contest on, right? But even if we were talking about people who you've known, for example, for 3-4 months at maximum, this being a realistic scenario, we think that even in that case, ghosting is justified, something that I will talk about within my substantive case, right? But also let's talk about their characterization again. We don't think that this is a one-sided rule, right? When you're talking about ghosting, we don't think that you have one victim and one perpetrator. You have two individuals engaging in a conversation, and you cannot possibly believe that one individual is so stupid as to not realize that the other individual is not attached to them at all, right? We think that the entire primary characterization of individuals being so irrational is something that is not really realistic.
POI?
Let's talk about no, thank you. Second point of rebuttal, right? Let's talk about their policy on open communication. But in what world is open communication justified? Something that they did not prove to us, something that they did not tell us. We believe that open communication and closure is something that is only dependent on relationships that are strong enough to justify such an action in the first place. We think that when you're talking about online relationships, individuals who have not met in real life, such a damage, it does not warrant closure. We don't think you're destroying somebody's mental health by simply not talking to them. We don't think that that simply stands, right? But let's move on to our own substantive case. We have three important issues today. We believe that the right of privacy is something that is being continually undermined in the status quo, right? We believe that individuals with the advent of social media have become way too entitled for them to warrant the right of closure or anything that side proposition is propagating, right? Secondly, we believe that security is a serious concern, particularly cybersecurity, something that we will be dealing with in our positive case. Lastly, mental health and healthy boundaries. That is what we're advocating on side opposition today. We think that these are very important characteristics when it comes to online demeanor, and that is something that we are protecting. We have in our policy, we believe that people should have the right to stop talking to individuals they're uncomfortable with. People should have the right to block them at any point when they feel like they're not comfortable. We think that every individual has that essential right to autonomy. But this leads us to our moral argument. We have two moral premises for you today: why individuals have the right to consent even in the online sphere, and why individuals have the right to privacy and the right to protection. Let's talk about consent. We believe that in life right now, people have the right to say no to conversation. When you have a strange man approaching you in real life, you have the right to turn that man away and tell him that you do not want to talk to him. When you have a friend that you've had that you're not comfortable with, you have the right to stop communicating with that friend. We think that that same right applies within the online sphere as well, right? Because we believe that the digital age is something that is very, very complex. We think that technology has exacerbated and has developed at such an exponential rate that policy is something that has not kept up with it. What this essentially means is that people's right to consent on social media is something that is violated again and again and again. Whether it be catfishing, whether it be your photos being stolen, your name being stolen, your identity being stolen, we think that all of these are things that you cannot necessarily control in the real world. But what you can control is who you engage with. What you can control is who you talk to. And we think that that is a right that you should have on the online sphere, right? We think that this is something that you should maintain essentially. But let's talk about privacy. We believe, let's talk about why people ghost in the first place. 4 main reasons. Number 1, you are uncomfortable with the individual that you are talking to. Number 2, the individual you're talking to is somebody who you consider to be problematic, is somebody who is, for example, harassing you or somebody that is crossing your boundaries. Number 3, we believe that this is somebody that is emotionally draining or manipulative. And number 4, we believe that generally speaking, you should have the right to stop talking to individuals that you're simply not interested in, right? We don't believe that you have the right to continue conversations with individuals that you will not get along with. But in the long run, no, thank you, that is a lot more harmful. But what is the context here? What do online relationships look like? We believe that dating apps are something that are short-term relationships, right? Because that is something that you've only just joined and you've only gotten to know people. What that essentially means is that these are very shallow relationships. You spend less time together and you are not aware of the aspects of personalities of the individuals that you are getting to know. We believe that some individuals have too much control over how they portray themselves, in the sense that they're able to limit the negative aspects of their life, and it takes a little bit of time. For example, it takes a little bit of time to get to know the individual you're talking to and get to realize that in your gut you do not trust that individual. In your gut you think that that individual will potentially harm you. So what that essentially means is that ghosting is a last resort. We believe that ghosting only takes place when you've talked to an individual, when you've realized that that individual is not for you, right? Because people are rational at the end of the day. But why are these rights important, right? Since we've already given you the context. Number 1, social media. We've already told you that rules that govern online etiquette are things that have consistently crossed boundaries, and these boundaries cause actual harms when they are crossed. We believe that in a scenario where you do not ghost an individual who is making you uncomfortable, you're likely to, out of politeness, continue dragging on that conversation, or out of, for example, being threatened. And what that is likely to end up is actual real life harm to both you and the individual that you are likely to ghost, right? But also, secondly, people's own dignity and autonomy, people's own freedom to talk to whoever they want to, their own personal rights are something that people should be able to control.
Point of information before
thank you. But moving on to my practical argument, we're going to talk about how our site ensures healthy boundaries, how our site ensures safety of women and gender minorities. The first premise: what is general safety and healthy boundaries premised on? We're characterizing social media once again, right? Once again, we're telling you that technology has advanced so exponentially fast that policies have not kept up. What this essentially means is that technology allows individuals to be
before 7
online. No, thank you. Technology allows individuals to, for example, hide aspects of their lives. Technology allows individuals to be disingenuous in the online sphere. We think that this disallows individuals. We think that this disallows individuals from actually getting a proper assessment of who they're talking to, and what that leads to are specific harms. Number 1, on a mental level. Number 2, on a productive level, and number 3, on a security and privacy level. On a mental level, you are likely to be vulnerable to coercion in such a scenario because social media is something that is extremely manipulative. In such a scenario, you should have at least a boundary that is harder than the boundary that you have in real life, right? But when we're talking specifically about women, when we're talking specifically about the safety of women, we're telling you that women in society have been raised and conditioned in order to, for example, continue conversations or continue friendships because of 2 main reasons. Number 1, conditioning, and number 2, out of their own safety, past experiences, etc. Past experience, etc. is when you lead a man on, for example, and you end up rejecting that man and you end up actually putting yourself in harm's way. We think that those are the scenarios that we're operating in today, and in such a world, you should have the right to block individuals that you are not comfortable with. But let's talk about gender minorities as well. We think that gender minorities lack safe spaces in the status quo. What this essentially means is that the only area where they're able to find safe spaces is online. This is very, very unfortunate, but this is a necessary evil because otherwise they wouldn't have any other avenue. And in such a scenario, these gender minorities are very, very susceptible to, for example, being outed or being harassed or being actively discriminated against. In such a world, these individuals should have the right to block people they are not comfortable with. These individuals should have the right to stop conversing with individuals that do not make them feel safe. So proud to oppose.
Right, Deputy Leader. Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Yes, can we just have 10 seconds?
Okay.
Am I both audible and visible?
Yep.
Okay, my viewer preference is in the chat. Starting in 3, 2. Side proposition defeats their own characterization by their policy, which says that you can just tell a person that I don't want to continue a relationship with you, and that can be considered not you ghosting. That means that you are still not providing them with closure. You are still not telling that person where they went wrong, and you're still not fulfilling the responsibility to commit to someone. Feel like they defeat their purpose from the very beginning. But second, the characterization of online relationships. Understand that the reason people move to online relationships is because they want to have some sort of fling, or they just want to pass time. This is why these online relationships are likely to not manifest themselves in real relationships. This means that when you are dating on a dating app and you're not disclosing them, like your personal details or your phone number or contact, etc., that means that you are not shifting your whole relationship from dating app to WhatsApp or Instagram, maybe because you don't consider that relationship to be that strong or important in your life. So you feel like at that point in time, firstly, you never really committed to that person for being long-term in their lives or committing to having a good, fruitful relationship with them. So you don't have responsibility of them. But secondly as well, understand how this age of social media makes you believe that you have taken responsibility of everyone, even if it comes at the mental cost, and it hampers your mental health from the very beginning. Because when you are in social media, there is a general expectation that you have to be available for someone else. You have to be accountable for the time that you're living in your literal daily life. You're like literally, the lines between your personal and professional social lives are literally blurred, because you are being put, and there's an impetus being put on you that you are responsible for things. You feel like that the harms that it has are very exclusive. People are drained. People feel burdensome. They don't want to talk, and they are detaching themselves from the environment because it is becoming so draining for it. And understand, this is where the characterization of people who ghost become very important, because when there is a conversation just being redundant, you might not be able to recognize the exact problem which exists within that conversation, but it's not being fruitful to you. It's not being productive to you. You might not even recognize a reason just because you get a vibe or a good feeling that that person is wrong, or that person is generally harming my mental health, etc., which is then realistically fine for you to pull yourself away from that person. Understand, this is not something abhorrent in the status quo, because you do this in your real life and you literally distance yourself from people who just exhibit toxic vibes to you, or who harm you from little sentences that you can't just put together, but you recognize that something is not right and something is harming you. Feel like this is where we are taking our precedence from. But thirdly as well, understand that when we talk about harassment or the feelings of uncomfortableness is not something which is very extreme or something that
This
does not happen
information.
please take in the chat. Understand, this is not something just abhorrent, does not happen in the status quo, because in the status quo these issues literally exist. If this issue of harassment exists on ground with women in daily life, then it's far more likely to exist in these dating platforms, where a culprit is not even seen. The culprit is literally anonymous, and you are unable to reach them if they harass or bully you or make you uncomfortable in any way at all. Like, this is where the autonomy of women, this is where they talk about the rights of women having the right of privacy, consent, etc., become extremely important, because you should have the right to withdraw yourself from a harasser without having to explain why that harassment happened, why did you think it was harassment, or why or how did it impact you. But secondly as well, it is extremely hard and burdensome for you to even confront that person that he made you uncomfortable, because firstly, you tend to gaslight yourself. You tend to feel like that this isn't a big issue, which is why you just distance yourself, because you can't put up with it, but also you don't want to confront because it requires you to have so much, to put in so much power. But secondly as well, you're traumatized by the experience, and you can't really pinpoint what actually went wrong. When they give you the idea of just recording stuff, it's not all right, because when you even if you have chats, etc., it is extremely hard to tell the impact of that chat that had on your mind, because that is your mental health. This is you being impacted, something that cannot be objectively identified to be portrayed onto the other person. But lastly as well, the idea or the stakeholder that side proposition wants to prioritize on their side. Firstly, we feel like that people who get ghosted are not the primary stakeholder, not the most important stakeholder within this debate, because they are the ones who are not facing the brunt of being having to be always available, or the issues of commitment, because the person who is ghosting you never really committed to you. But secondly, as well, understand how closure does not exist for the people who are getting ghosted as well. Because see how that confrontation is going to look like inside proposition model. Because if you're confronting someone, you're likely to use inflammatory language, you're likely to have a full-blown fight with them to tell them that they are wrong, etc. When you have this kind of full-blown fights, etc., you're likely to induce insecurities within these people far more on your side. And feel like that these inflammatory language or these fights are far more prevalent within these kind of spaces, because firstly there is no accountability for you or your actions, but secondly as well, when you're in an online setting, it is far more easier for you to exhibit your anger because you know that there are going to be no consequences for it. But understand, multiple constructors that we give you on our side, the idea of people being catfish and you recognizing that they're catfish does not put the impetus on you to prove that they are wrong in the very beginning. And secondly as well, the idea of gender minorities and women specifically, we feel that these people are already so vulnerable in the status quo, they should not go through extreme sense of vulnerability where they have to fight an oppressor in the very first place. But before I move on, short view.
Relationships require consideration of choice because your choice can equally harm someone emotionally invested in you. We restrict choices in the status quo that harm other people. Why is your principle absolute?
The premise of relationship having commitment is based on the fact that you are having a strong relationships. You being on a dating app is quite literally to you like having one night stand or going to a club for a day, etc. I feel like that is not commitment from the very beginning. And even if you want to develop a relationship, we feel like that you develop it outside of the digital dating app sector. And as long as you're in that app, you don't owe anyone any responsibility because you don't commit to them. But understand on our side how people who are getting ghosted are benefited as well. First, I've already proven to you the idea of how confrontation is going to impact them far more. But secondly as well, understand that if you don't ghost them and you're trying to be nice to them so that their own mental health is not harmed, so their proposition tries to do. See what happens then, because these people are then going to be led on by the person who would have ghosted on our side. These people are going to be led on. They're going to feel like that something is going to happen in the very long run. They're going to interpret messages to a very micro level and feel like that person might be giving me hints or want to have some sort of long-term relationship with me, where all the while when the other person is not interested. But secondly as well, understand that they're going to be impacted by the emotional baggage that this ghosted person is bringing with them, and they're likely to project it again and again just because they feel so suffocated within that relationship, but cannot say no to them or cannot withdraw themselves from that relationship, from the very picture. But thirdly as well, these people also like to be very detached from the relationship. So when they keep putting up with the relationship that they have no feelings with, at that point in time, they're going to start hating themselves and start not having any kind of meaningful idea or relationship with that person. But understand that on our side, when we talk about people having this like flimsy or flimsy sector on these dating apps, firstly, we are actually portraying the right characterization of how these dating apps look like. But secondly as well, we feel like this is where the differentiating factor between dating apps and dating in real life really stems from. But thirdly as well, we feel like sure, there are certain people who find the love of their life through dating apps, but they don't stick to dating apps in that scenario. They go farther from it and they meet in real life, or maybe they exchange other platforms as a sector. But on their side as well, understand that they are not reaching any impact, because if their impact is that the person is dating should have far better relationships, or that the person who is being dumped should have far better communication, etc., they're not doing any of it by their own policy, which says that you just have to say that I don't want to talk to you anymore. Because understand, you are not doing anything in that scenario. You don't care about that person either. You are being indifferent to that person still. You are being detached and you're distancing yourself regardless. Side proposition defeated themselves with their own policy. Let this motion fall.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for the fine speech. Now I'd like to call on the Alfred. Here.
Hi, I'm third speaker for the proposition, and since I'm the other speaker, I wasn't able to say this earlier, but I don't consent for recording. It's okay if you could erase the recording. That's all right.
Yeah, just give me 30 seconds, please. Am I visible and audible?
Yep.
Okay. Just give me a second. I'm setting up my timer. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1, go. Side proposition essentially loses this debate when they fail to understand what relationships actually work like. Because understand what characterization they're using to argue the entirety of the harms within their case. They say that in a long-term relationship, only one person is invested enough that if you ghost them suddenly, they're going to be very heartbroken, etc. What's wrong with this characterization? The issue with this characterization is that you are actively asserting and assuming that the other person who has been in a long-term relationship with you simply has the ability to just ghost you after developing that kind of a bond. We don't think these kind of relationships are included in this because people do not have the ability to just ghost people that they have been in love with or have been acquainted with for years and years. Therefore, we think that is an unfair and extreme characterization. A majority of their harms do not stand. But second very important clarification. We told you, they had this unfair idea of how we kind of restricted the debate by having extreme characterizations. Why is that so problematic? First, because they think that making someone uncomfortable is black and white. You can either be an outward harasser and only then be seen as a problematic person, We think that is inherently wrong because the idea of feeling uncomfortable is subjective to each and every individual in the first place. We give you several examples of how, whether your political views or whether the way that you perceive these people or pass comments on them or the kind of way that you engage in conversation with them, if any of that comes at the cost of their comfort or their mental health or the way that they are generally living, we think all of that those are valid enough reasons and are not extreme in any shape, way, or form. Therefore, we think the two major attacks I had on our case do not stand. They don't have anything on their side of the house, and reply is far too late to have any kind of damage controls. But three issues within my speech. Number one, what impacts do we have on ghosters on our side of the house? Second, what impacts do ghosties have on our side of the house? And third, the very important idea of moral, which was largely left unrefuted by side proposition. So onto the first issue, the idea of the impact on ghosters, and understand these are the most important stakeholders for us to prove that we win this debate. Understand, notice an inconsistency within side propositions characterization of these people. On one hand, they say that these people are so irrational and so crazy, mean, insensitive that they're always simply going to see ghosting as a first resort without caring about anyone's feelings. But then they think that these same people are nice and kind enough to provide good closure for the person that they're ghosting. We think that is logically inconsistent, but what is actually likely to happen? Let me tell you what will happen. Anna already talked about this, but understand when essentially you're in a relationship, and whether you're sick of the person or whether that person is causing you extreme emotional turmoil, what the conversation that you're likely to have, something that is their alternative and they take a lot of pride in, is essentially is counterproductive, because it would be filled with things like inflammatory language or personal attacks or pointing out issues within people that could create insecurities in the long run. I'll be elaborating on this within my second issue about the impacts on ghosties. Therefore, we think not only would this conversation, according to their own characterization, be very, very counterproductive and mean and bad, as they'd like to say, but we think the reason that we gave you about how people want to conversations, essentially chat these, how people essentially want to avoid these conversations because they have things like mental health issues that they don't want to project on people. Why was this characterization so important, and why is it important to note how they ignored it? Because we gave you the characterization of how social media right now essentially pushes people to be always available for other people, to give the sense of entitlement to other people that you owe it to them. And because of this access to other people and this engagement with other people all the time, we think you're more likely to have issues of mental health, etc. Therefore, we think not only is that conversation likely to be inflammatory, but it's also likely to be a product of mental health projection. Therefore, we think all of those ideas don't stand, it's inconsistent. But then understand the impact on the people who ghost, right? We think when you're likely to, let's look at their model for a second. When you're likely to have engaged in this open communication, what is likely to happen? Let's take your own characterization. This person really, really loves you. We think that in those specific instances, that is when you're more likely to be coerced to not leave them in the first place at the cost of your own happiness, at the cost of your own autonomy, at the cost of your own mental health. We think that in no way, shape, or form is morally justified, because if their entire endpoint is you can't break people's hearts, then we think essentially side proposition wouldn't allow for things like breakups to happen in the first place, because you really need to protect the other person's heart. We think if things aren't working out, if you're being gaslighted, if this is too much of a burden to put up, you're not obligated to go forward with this. And we think on the harms that we pointed out about people not being able to leave relationships or being subjected to the trauma that they faced in the past, we think all of those issues still stand. And lastly, we think all of the harms that they pointed out about clinginess, I'm going to get trust issues, I'm going to have issues in my life. We think all of those issues are essentially irrelevant to the person, because it is not my responsibility to essentially baby you and pamper you and to ensure that you're always going to be happy and mentally okay. We don't think that is a fair responsibility to put on someone's significant other. But second issue about the impacts on the ghostie, we think they essentially undo any kind of benefits they could have had by their own policy, because according to them, an open conversation looks like, bye, I don't want to talk to you, no explanation as to why. Why is that so bad? We think that is so bad because that is not closure in any shape, way, or form. Why is our world better? We think on our side of the house, even if we take their best characterization that the person was a good person, they didn't do anything to deserve the things that happened to them, we think when someone leaves without saying goodbye, it is in those instances where you don't blame yourself, rather you vilify the other person and are more likely to get over these kind of things. We think when you have this open conversation, you're more likely it's more likely that deep your insecurities are pointed out. It's more likely that you are personally attacked, and that is when you're more likely to fall into cycles of self-deprecation and essentially the blame game, etc. Right? Therefore, we think none of these ideas stand. But on the last level, we think when you essentially enter a relationship, you consent to the idea of knowing that there's a 50% chance of getting hurt in the process. Right? Therefore, we think that heartbreak being their biggest endpoint is not a good enough endpoint. When we talked about how on our side of the house, we on a moral level, we uphold people's right to privacy, we uphold their right to consent, we uphold their right to safety, and we uphold their ability to have healthy barriers and to protect their own mental health, etc. But let's look at this on a comparative. What is their best case? We think their best case looks like closure for a ghostie. I've taken down this ghostie on both levels. On a level in which they're actual harmful individuals and do not deserve this closure, but even on a secondary level in which there might be good people but don't end up getting the closure that side proposition essentially champions. What is our worst case? We think even in our worst case, if you ghost these people for no reason, even if you ghost these people as a first resort, you still end up protecting these people's consent and privacy and their right to it. You still allow them to have a moderate conversation. You still allow them to protect things like their security, because our conversations about minorities and their ability and their drive to be able to protect their information or the kind of people that they can engage with, because in this day Asian form, the ability to regulate technology is not too great, but you can control who you interact with. And because at the end of the day, we think a person's duty is solely towards themselves and not other people, because we benefit all stakeholders in our models and we have the moral high ground, we clearly take this.
Thank you all for fine speech. Now I'd like to call upon the op reply. Here.
Hello, am I both audible and visible?
Yep.
Okay, starting in 3, 2. When we give you the examples of women rejecting another person in clubs, when we give you the example of you not having the burden of call out your harasser, when we give you the example of people actually distancing themselves in real life as well, when they feel burdensome by another person, we have this debate in the real world and we take the precedence that exists outside the realm of social media. This is where proposition lost this debate from the very beginning, where they were unable to characterize how these things manifest in real life, or how would they look, how do they attach themselves to your other life outside social media or the precedence they might have. But understand secondly as well, their characterization of dates on dating app, it was extremely skewed, because we told you that firstly, if commitment exists, then that commitment is likely to be existent on both sides, which is why the other person will also be very unlikely to ghost you. But secondly as well, if that commitment is extremely important to you, that there has been so much done and there has been so much emotional attachment, etc., then you are likely to take this commitment outside of the dating apps and actually manifest itself in your daily life. But secondly as well, the only principle that they have, which was a principle of reciprocity. Understand why is that not true? Because this principle is premised upon the fact that you have gotten benefit from that person, but their policy is applicable to all people who might have not gotten any kind of benefit from talking or having conversation with another person. But secondly as well, who might have been harmed by that by person. But understand, so in that scenario, their principle applies better on our side when we show to you that harm has been done, and your reciprocity should be that you don't talk to that person. But secondly as well, understand, you still don't owe anyone anything, because when you go on these dating sites, you don't commit, you're not really married to them, you never signed a contract, you never really told them that I even want to have something sustainable long term with you. But second issue as well, which is that why is the ghoster primary stakeholder on our side? Because that is a person that you are placing the burden of explanation on, because that is a person you are forcing to have conversation, and you are telling them that your mental health does not matter as much as that of the person who might have impacted you. Because understand, they cannot win their debate on certain marginal grounds, because their debate is about every person that you ghost, no matter how bad that person has been to you, in order for a proposition to meaningfully win this debate. But secondly as well, they just generally assume that the person who ghosts is going to be the perpetrator, and the person who is being ghosted is the victim. We feel like that's not necessarily true, because people who ghost have reasons for ghosting, which can look like that the other person has perpetrated harms on your mental health. They never once gave us characterization why is it other person the victim, but what is their best case? In their best case, if we can see to everything at all, the only benefits that they have is firstly, Dumpy has closure, or second is that the person who is ghosting is going to have more sustainable relationships in future. Even if I take all of those things, regardless of the missing analysis or things, what is our worst case? In our worst case, firstly, we are protecting the right of consent, privacy, and security of these very people, something which is inherent to them and which you cannot realistically take away from them in a democracy or in just generally their lives. But secondly as well, we don't allow for false promises, etc., within their own lives, and we don't want them to be like led on in future. But thirdly as well, feel like that we are improving mental health of people, because firstly, they don't have to go through unnecessary fights, or they don't have to be gaslighted or emotionally blackmailed. But secondly as well, they don't have to feel burdened because they had a conversation with another person for one day, which meant nothing to both of them, but now they feel that there's some sort of accountability to it. But most important, the most important for impact, which was never taken by side proposition, was the security of these minorities. Understand that you being able to call out someone and have a conversation with them about their harassing attitudes is premised upon a privilege that sector, and we feel like that when you call them out, that person is likely to know that you're going to be impacted, and that person is likely to leak all of those things which is going to impact you. When you ghost that person knows that you're no longer affected by them, that you're no longer in contact with them, which is why they're going to withdraw themselves as well. On our side, we cater to the actual vulnerable victim, and we cater to the people who have been
Great. I think your reply for fine speech. I'd like to call one the reply here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Wait, I'll just drink water. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2,